All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. A beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Let us begin by going ahead and thanking our sponsors. To first thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Max and Brenda Lapkovsky, in honor of Yitzchak Meir's upcoming bar mitzvah. Dr. Riva Mitzner, in commemoration of the first yarzheit of her father, Dr. Larry Schneck, Aryeh Ben Chaim, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Mark and Sarah Meisler, for the yahrzeit of Mark's grandmother and ultimate Chana Devora Bas Yehuda, Bill and Razi Eskin, Lezecha Nishmas Bill's father Mordechai Ben David, and Lezecha Nishmas Razi's mother Tzivya Bas Moshe Aaron, and our Daf Yomi sponsor today, Nathan and Beth Adler, in memory of Aunt Betty Gutterman, Batya Bas Rab Nassan, on the occasion of her yahrzeit. We hope that the neshama has an aliyah and the family a nechama. And I will say with that, let us begin. Today's daf is daf Vav, a beautiful and incredible daf ahead of us today. We are picking up in Yirtzeh Hashem on Hey Amud Beis. We are picking up on 5b, and I believe we left off Mimai, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 lines up from the bottom. Last word on this. So remember again, in yesterday's daf, something really beautifully dramatic occurred, which was the idea that pretty much everything about Sukkah is learned out from the Aron. So remember again, we have the height of the walls being learned out from the height of what we'll call, for lack of a better term, the container of the Aron, container plus the lid. And now ultimately, again, what we ended up with yesterday is the idea that the schach needing to be lamala me'asara. That the schach, remember again, the Gemara floated a possibility that maybe the schach itself could be within the 10 tefachim. 10 tefachim is the minimum shear, but maybe the 10 tefachim includes the schach as well, to which the Gemara proves from the fact that the wings of the kruvim were extended above the kruvim, and they're referred to as schach. And therefore, again, the Gemara gleans from that the idea that the schach itself is not included in the 10 tefach measurement, but rather is above the 10. So the Gemara says, "Tfinu alayu reshayu, ilui reshayu kaimi, dilma lahadi reshayu kaimi." To which the Gemara says, well, how do you know that the wings of the kruvim were extended above their head? Maybe the wings of the kruvim were simply by their sides, or lahadi rishai, or by the head. Amrav Achabar Yaakov lemaliksiv, because the pasuk says sochachin bekanfehem lemala. The pasuk indicates that the wings were extended upward. I be'ema demidli tuva. So maybe the wings were really extended much higher. Miksiv lamala ulamala. Does it say lamala lamala? It just says lamala. So lamala Rabbi we understand to mean immediately above the head. Good. So Rabbi say this entire discussion, remember, this entire discussion began by the Gemara asking a very simple question. Mishnah, you told me the minimum dimensions of a sukkah, or the minimum dimensions of the wall, is 10 tefachim. Where do I learn that out from? To which the Gemara answered, I learned it out from the Aron. Fine. We'll say, what do I know about the Aron? Let's talk about this in just a moment. What do I know about the Aron? The Torah gives me the dimensions of the height of the box. What doesn't the Torah give me the dimensions of? The height of the lid. Right, so the whole discussion was about the lid. To which the Gemara says, okay, well, let's talk about this in just a moment. The Torah tells me when it speaks about the height of the box, it says, Amma v'chetzi, 1.5 amos. To which the Gemara says, Hanichal Rabbi Meir da'amar kala amos hayu benonios. Both say this whole discussion makes sense according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that the amma we're talking about is an amma of 6 tefachim. So if you're dealing with an amma of 6 tefachim, then okay, beautiful. Then I have a box that is 9 tefachim tall. And then again, we go through our whole exercise in order to go ahead and arrive at the conclusion that the lid is 1 tefach in height. El Rabbi Huda da'amar amma shal binyan, 6 tefachim, v'shal kelim chamisha, ma'i kelim emar. I will say, but according to Rabbi Yehuda is an interesting shita. Rabbi Yehuda holds like this. An amma, for construction purposes, was an amma of 6 tefachim. But when we speak about an amma of utensils, they used an amma of 5 tefachim. Oh, well, then this changes the entire discussion. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, Aron v'kapores kamahavi. I will say, if you're only dealing with an amma, ultimately, again, of 5 tefachim, so what's 5.5? So what's an out? I'm sorry. If you're only dealing with an amma of 5 tefachim, so then essentially again, what is 1.5 amos? The Gemara says, Kama havi, havilu tamni upalga. It'll be 8.5 tfachim. Pashuluhu chad sari upalga. Ultimately, going to say what that would mean is that halacha lamaisa, when measuring the aron vis-a-vis the height of the mishkan, you would have 11.5 tfachim of space. Ema sukkah ad dahavya chad sari upalga. Maybe then sukkah, the minimum share of sukkah shouldn't be 10 tfachim. Maybe the minimum share of sukkah should be what? 11.5 tfachim. To which the Gemara says, you're right. This whole previous discussion does not work according to Rabbi Huda. The discussion about say we had on the entire daf of Hay was only a discussion according to Rabbi Meir, who holds that an amma in the mikdash, when I say mikdash, it's mikdash / mishkan, is an amma of 6 tfachim. So where does Rabbi Yehuda learn about the minimum dimension of a wall being 10 tfachim in height? Listen to this, Rabbi say. This is so fascinating. Ella, Rabbi Yehuda hilchasa gemiri lehu. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Fascinating, Rabbi say. Isn't this absolutely incredible? You see, what's beautiful about this is, what is everybody agreeing on? What is everybody agreeing on? Right? Minimum dimensions, right? So that's the beauty of this. Everyone is agreeing that the minimum height of a wall ultimately, again, is 10 tfachim. What they're disagreeing about is how you get there. According to Rabbi Meir, the way I'm getting there, again, is really based on the height of the aron combined with the lid. According to Rabbi Huda, that's not going to work, because Rabbi Huda is going to use an amma that's made up of 5 tfachim. So where does Rabbi Huda learn out the minimum shear of a wall for sukkah is going to be 10 tfachim? Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Both sides, to which the Gemara opens up a beautiful discussion. Here we go. The Amar Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, Amarav. Both sides, listen to how beautiful this is. Shiurin, chatzitzin umechitzin. So we'll say shiurin. Rashi says over here, shiurin shalisurin kigon kizayis l'chol achilas iser uksovas umekipurim. In general, shiurin, whether it's a kizayis, whether it's the size of a date for consumption of Yom Kippur, chatzitzin. Both say chatzitzin represent the halacha that's what of a chatzitza, an interposition. Remember again, if a person has to immerse in a mikvah, so the body must be free of any alien substances that would interpose between the body and the water. And mechitzin. We'll say mechitzin are the laws of hilchos mechitza, right? The laws of what makes a partition, what makes a wall. All of these things are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Right? Shi'ur and chatzitzin and mechitzin halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So say the Gemara says, Shi'urin da'araisa ninu. From where do we know that Shi'urin da'araisa? Say, listen to this. Where do we learn that out from? D'chsiv, Eretz chita u'sa'ora, v'gefen u'te'ena v'rimon, Eretz zeis shemen u'dvash. We'll say this is beautiful. What's the pasuk that's the makar for all Shi'urin? All Shi'urin, the pasuk of Shiva Saminim. Isn't it incredible? The 7 species of Eretz Yisrael, right? The land of wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, zeis shemen. Remember again, refers to dates, date honey, udvash. I'm sorry, olives and dvash is date honey. So I'll say, just as an aside, how incredibly beautiful this is, and how auspicious it is that we're reading this Gemara now during the 9 days, right? When we mourn so much of what we've lost over the years in Am Yisrael and in Eretz Yisrael. And here, you know what the Gemara is saying? Even before we go on, the Gemara is saying anything and everything in life derives its source from Eretz Yisrael. This is incredibly important. In other words, we don't know how this is going to, according to me, this pasuk is the makar for all shi'urin, and we'll discuss what it means. But whatever it means, it tells you that this is all of halacha. All of halacha, just like everything in life, just like the entire life force of the Jew, somehow is rooted and emanates from the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. Such an incredible thing. And that's why I think, for those of us who have been locked out of Eretz Yisrael, again, for a long time, it's existentially painful. Because anything and everything we are stems in some way from the kedusha of the land. The shiurim themselves are from Eretz Yisrael. So I'll say, let's analyze this. Here we go. Says the Gemara. This entire pasuk is to teach us the halachas of shiurim. Both says a very exciting Gemara. Here we go. We're going to go through each of them and discuss the shiurim that it teaches us. What do I learn from chita, from grain? Chita teaches me the halachas of tumah in a house afflicted with saras. Okay, How exactly does that work? So watch this. The Gemara says, this done. Hanichnas labayis hamenuga, the kelebak seifav, v'sandal v'tava osa biyado. If a person walks into a home, and his kalim, literally again his clothing, is on his shoulders, and his shoes and his rings are in his hand. So what's happening in this case? I'm not wearing my clothing. Again, I could be wearing clothing also, but the point over here is I'm carrying clothing. I'm carrying my shoes. I'm carrying my rings, my accessories. What's the halacha? Hu vehein tmeyin miyad. Everything becomes tamei immediately. Hu means my person, my body. Hein ultimately again means my clothing. Everything becomes tamei immediately. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says they're tamein miyad below shehiyah, without any type of waiting. They become tamei instantaneously. Rashi says, "Tichsev v'haba el habayis yitma v'kulu ba el habayis karina bahu." But so this is actually very interesting. So what the Gemara is saying is like this: when you're carrying your clothing, see the Torah says anything that comes into the home ultimately again becomes tamei immediately. So when you enter in and you're holding your clothing, both you and your clothing have come into the home, and therefore everything becomes instantaneously tamei. Top of vav. On the other hand, hayalavush kelav v'sandalav beraglav v'taba osav be'etzba osav. But so what happens if I walk into my home, but I'm wearing my clothing? Right, I'm wearing my clothing. My clothing is on my body. My shoes, my sandals are on my feet. My rings are on my finger. So what's the halacha? Hu tamei miyad. I, meaning my body, becomes tamei immediately. V'hein tehorin ad she'yishe b'chtei achilas pras. And ultimately, again, my clothing and accessories remain tahar until I linger inside of the home. Kedei achilas pras. And about say kedei achilas pras means the amount of time it takes to consume half a loaf of bread. We'll get into that in just a moment. But take a look at the top Rashi. Rashi says, "Hayu lavush kelav the ikul begadav hu tamei miyad d'chsev abal habayis v'hein tehorin ad she'yishe." Rashi says, "Va'ochal bayis ichabes v'dashim v'taras kohanim einli ela ochal b'shochev ochal v'lo shochem." I'm just going to read Rashi quickly. Shochev v'lo ochal lo ochal v'lo shochem minayin tamalomer yichabes begadav riba shtei pamim ksiv yichabes begadav v'msof no l'rabos hakol ma tamalomer va'ochal litin shir l'shochev kedei achila. She'ein ta'un kibus begadim ashisha. So we'll say Rashi has the whole drasha here, but the drasha ultimately is like this: if you're carrying your clothing into the home, so then essentially carried clothing, carried accessories have the same din as a body. What happens with the body? As soon as you walk into the bayis hamanuga, the home afflicted with ras, what happens? Everything is tamei. However, if you're wearing your clothing, then ultimately again worn accessories, worn clothing have a different halacha. Whereas the person, the body, becomes tamei immediately, worn clothing and accessories will only become tamei if you linger inside of the home for some, what we'll call halachically substantive amount of time. How long is a substantive amount? Half a loaf. And by the way, what type of loaf? Paschitin v'lo pas sa'orin. It's a wheat loaf and not a barley loaf. Rabbi say it takes less time to eat wheat bread than it does to eat barley bread. Mesav va'ochel b'liftan. And reclining and eating with liftan is like a condiment or a relish. So Rabbi say, so interesting enough, from the word chita teaches me that the shear for tumah, if you are wearing your clothing, right? So if you're carrying your clothing, you're carrying your shoes, you're carrying your accessories, ultimately again, you go ahead and the items, if you're carrying it, then halacha l'maisa, again, everything becomes tamei immediately. But if you're wearing it, then by definition, the body becomes tamei immediately, and halacha l'maisa, the clothing, accessories, only become tamei if you linger there long enough. Kedei achilas pras pas chitin. If you go ahead and you linger in there long enough to eat half a loaf of wheat bread, this is what we're learning from chita, mesa, reclining, belifton with a condiment, good. Saora, what do I learn out from barley? I learn from barley, disnan. Etzem kisara matami mago masa, ve'eno matami ba'ohel. So what do I learn from barley? What I learned from barley is that, oh, sorry, by the way, I'll just say something interesting. There was a Shaila post to the Beis Halevi, the following Shaila. If there are two people walking into the Beis Medrash, one is carrying talis and tefillin, and one is wearing talis and tefillin. Which one should go in first? Who should be allowed into the basement? Again, people want to you want to give cover. Who should go in first? So it's actually quite fascinating. The Beis Halevi said, based on this Gemara, the person carrying the talis and tefillin should go in first. Because you see from here that carrying something, ultimately again makes it part of your person to a certain degree, even greater than wearing it, which is totally counterintuitive, right? Because again, remember, if you carry your talis, if you carry your clothing into the bayis hamanuga, it becomes tamei together with you. Masha'inkin, if you're wearing it, at least halachically, seems to be reckoned independently of you. So the Beis Halevi said, you see from here that carrying the chavtza shel mitzvah can even be greater than wearing the chavtza shel mitzvah. To which everyone jumps on the Beis Halevi. What are you talking about? The guy wearing it is what? Being mekayim mitzvah. So of course he should go first. Okay, so just an interesting I just happened to come across. I saw a quote in a sefer yesterday. Just really quite fascinating. I'll say again, it could also it's also interesting to note that maybe even like hashkafically in that what the Beis Halevi is saying is that sometimes when things become a part of me, I recognize their greatness a little bit less than when they're a bit detached from me. In other words, we see this all the time in the realm of human relationships. Unfortunately, so many of us only truly appreciate the people we have in our lives when they're no longer here, right? It's interesting how sometimes when something is attached to you, you don't see its gadlus. When it's detached from you, suddenly you begin to see what it is. So the talis and tefillin, I could be wearing it and potentially sleeping through davening, but yet I look at it and I see, okay, that's a chavtza shel mitzvah. When it's independent of me, I can see the chavtza shel mitzvah. When it's on me, maybe I don't see it as much. Again, it seems to me that everybody rejects that notion of the Beis Halevi, at least vis-a-vis entering into the Beis Medrash. So if you're walking into shul, your talis tefillin are in your hand, and somebody else wearing talis tefillin, let them go first. In general, it's kedai to let other people go first, whether they're wearing talis and tefillin or not. But lamais, an interesting yesod about sometimes when something is attached to me, on me, part of me, I'm not makir its gadlos. I don't recognize its greatness. When it's separate and detached from me, sometimes I'm really able to see it for what it actually is. Good. Sa'ora. Both say, what do I learn from Sa'ora? What do I learn from barley? It's not etzem kisora metayim magomasa. A bone fragment that is the size of a barley kernel has the ability to convey tumah through maga and masa. Maga means touching, contact. Masa means carrying. I will say, remember again, that's carrying even without contact. So, for example, if I carry a bone fragment and I put it on a pillow, right? Then I'm carrying. So I'm not touching the bone fragment, but I'm carrying it. I could contract tumah that way. However, ve'eno tabi ba'ohel. But I will say, bone fragment does not go ahead and convey tumas ohel. So if I am under the same roof as a bone fragment, I do not contract tumah through that. In order to contract tumas ohel, you need some more significant part of the mace. Next, gefen. What do I learn from gefen, from grapes? Kedei revi'as yayin lenazir. So I will say, at first glance, the way this is understood is that a nazir goes ahead and breaks his nader nazirus if he consumes a revi'as of wine. Rashi here also advances something else which is quite fascinating. Rashi says, "Kedei revi'as yayin begefen, kedei revi'as yayin, b'shar isurei nazir di'ika lamandar meseches nazir dechartzonin velulavin va'olin mitzdarf l'shir revi'as yayin shem yitnei makos mala yayin ad shetzim and revi'as yayin." So let's listen to this. A nazir is not permitted to go ahead and, you're not permitted to consume grapes. So we'll say, what amount of grapes is a nazir not permitted to consume? So we'll say, so listen to this. So the Gemara is suggesting over here, it's the amount of grapes that would displace a revi'as of wine. The amount of grapes that would displace a revi'as of wine. I both say dafka wine and not water, since wine again is thicker than water. Therefore, by definition, it'll take a bit more to go ahead and displace a revius of wine. So interestingly enough, so the Gemara says, Gefen Kedei revius yain is not talking about consumption of wine, but rather it's talking about the other things that a Nazir is not permitted to eat. The shear is the amount that would displace a revius of wine. Incredible. Teina, what I learned from Teina from fig? Kegro Geres Lotzah Shabbos. We'll say that teaches me that the shear for Otzah, we'll say back to our Shabbos days. Remember, in order to be chayiv for Otzah, transferring an item from one domain to another, you have to carry a significant shear. What's the definition of a significant shear? At least the size of a fig. So if you carry a food item and it's less than the size of a fig, you're not chayiv for Otzah on Shabbos. Rimon, what did I learn from pomegranate? This nan kol klei balibatim shirim krimon. Let's listen to this. If you have a kli, if you have a let's say you have a bowl, and the bowl becomes tameh. So we'll say one of the ways in which one could go ahead and remove the tum of a kli, obviously again you could go through the mikveh, is how? Make a hole in it. Once you make a hole in it and it's no longer usable as a bowl, it loses its shem bowl, right? It loses its identity as a receptacle, as a kli. And when it loses its identity as a kli, it loses its tuma as well. So listen to this. So, but for balabatim, right, for what we'll call privately owned utensils, so if, let's say I have a grape bowl that I use for grapes, and it got the hole the size of a grape, what will I do? I'll use it for apples. Good. And if I go ahead and it gets a hole, the hole gets bigger than the size of apples, what will I use it for? Pomegranates, something bigger. The idea is people use their utensils. So again, as big as the hole gets, I'll just use it for something bigger. However, once it gets the hole the size of a pomegranate, it's not really usable for anything, and therefore it loses its identity as a kli. And once it loses its identity as a kli, it loses its tumah as well. So that's what it means. Rimon, pomegranate, it's not kol klei balibatim shirin karimonim. I will say that interestingly enough, that is different, let's say, than a kli that belongs to a merchant. A merchant will not hold on to a kli, ultimately, that even has a small hole. So interestingly enough, there's a difference between privately owned, utensils for private use versus utensils for commerce. Utensils for commerce could lose their tumah much sooner with a much smaller hole. Masha'enkein, privately used utensils will not lose their tumah until they develop a hole the size of a rimon. Incredible. Eretz zeis shemen udvash. So we'll say, what does it mean when it says a land of oil and honey? So the Gemara says, it's really Eretz zeis shemen. What do I learn from that? Eretz shekol shiurei kizesim. It's a land where all of the shiurim are a kizayis. So the Gemara says, what? Kol shiurei. What are you talking about? All the shiurim are a kizayis. We just went through a list of shiurim that are not the size of a kizayis. So the Gemara says, ha'ika hani da'aminan. What about all of these cases that we just spoke about? Ela'ima sharov shiurei kizesim. Rather, it means a land where the majority of the shiurim are kezayis. So we'll say, well, it's true. We're going through a list over here of shiurim that are not a kezayis. We know that the majority of shiurim in general are a kezayis. What do I learn finally from devash, from honey, from dates? Kikoseves hagasa b'yom kippurim. We'll say we learn that the shear for consumption on Yom Kippur is the size of a large date. Rashi says, koseves is a tamra, b'yom kippurim. So we know that by Yom Kippur, interestingly enough, the Torah phrases this prohibition as inui, as affliction. Therefore, the shear for achila on Yom Kippur is not a kizayis. Rather, the shear for achila on Yom Kippur is going to be the size of a koseves, a date. Good. Alma doraisa ninhu. We'll say, so therefore, again, what do you see from here? You see from here that all shiurin are a doraisa. Well, so remember again, this was Rav's statement of shiurin, chatzitzin, mechitzin, are halacha l'Moshe misinai. Now, we'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, why do you call it halacha l'Moshe misinai? We'll say, remember, when we speak about halacha l'Moshe misinai, what is a halacha l'Moshe misinai? What does that mean? What does that mean? It means it's not what? It's not written. You're not going to find the pasuk in the Torah. Now, you're telling me, Rav said before that all shiurin are halacha l'Moshe misinai. And Rabbi say, what have we done for this entire daf so far? We've shown that shiurim trace themselves back to the pasuk of Shivas Haminim. So why would you say that shiurim are a halacha l'Moshe misinai? In fact, shiurim are a da'araisa. Da'araisa means it's from a pasuk in the Torah. To which the Gemara says, no. Shir miksivi. To which the Gemara says, come on. Does the pasuk of Shiva Saminim, does it actually say anything that we just learned? Right? Did it actually say, does it say that chita is the shear for a half of a loaf of wheat bread for your clothing to become tummy when it's on you when you walk into a bayis hamenuga? Does it say that saora means a bone fragment the size of a barley kernel makes you tummy through contact? It doesn't say any of these things. Rather, the Gemara says, Ella hilchasaninhu ukras machta ba'alma. Rather, says the Gemara, the way you have to understand the Shiurim Bosa is shiurim, all the shiurim that we just discussed, all of these measurements are all the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And all the Gemara did was ultimately, again, go ahead and what? Kra asmachta ba'almahu. They went ahead and they simply, it's an asmachta. I will say, what's an asmachta? Asmachta is when you have an independently verified halacha and you just want to go ahead and kind of link it to a pasuk. The shiurim are not being learned from the pasuk of Shiva Saminim. The shiurim that we just spoke about are all a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Chazal are just linking it to the pasuk of Shiva Saminim. Or to say a little bit differently, it happens to be the pasuk of Shiva Saminim happens to be a very convenient way to remember all of these shiurim. And obviously, it's not by accident either that there's that linkage. But lemaisa, the shiurim themselves are not being learned from the pasuk. They are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. They're being linked to the pasuk. Good. Chatzitzin daraisin. Rabbi say, what's the next case? Chatzitzin. The halachos of chatzitzin, namely, again, that's what? That you can't have anything that interposes between your body and the water of the mikvah. So where is that a daraisa? D'chsev v'rachatz b'saro b'mayim shelo yehi davar chotzes beino lebein hamayim. Shabbos say again. The Gemara is questioning why do you call chatzitzin? Rav, you said chatzitzin is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's not halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's a din daraisa. The pasuk says v'rachatz b'saro b'mayim. You should go ahead and wash your flesh in the water, which means that the flesh, your flesh, the body has to come in contact with the water. For the body to come in contact with the water, there can't be what? There can't a chatzitza. It's a daraisa. It's not halacha l'Moshe Sinai. To which the Gemara says something amazing. Kiasi hilchasa l'sa'aro. Inachinam, you're right. What does the halacha l'Moshe Sinai teach me? The halacha l'Moshe Sinai teaches me that there can't be a chatzitza in one's hair. Ki de Rabba bar Chana. The Amar Rabba bar Chana nema achas kshura chotzetzes. But listen, Rabba bar Chana said that halacha l'maisa, if you have one hair that's tied in a knot, that's a chatzitza. Why? Because we'll say the assumption is that one hair could be tied tightly, and therefore the water will be unable to access the knotted part of the hair. Shalosh einon chotzetzos. 3 hairs tied together do not pose a chatzitza. Why not? Because we'll say the assumption is that when you tie 3 hairs together, you can't really knot it as tightly. Therefore, the water will access it. Shtayim eini yodea. 2, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if 2 tied hairs represent a chatzitza or not. So we'll say, the Gemara says, Sa'aranami doraisa. So Seyar is also not a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Seyar is also learned out from a pasuk. Where is it learned out from? T'chsiv berachatz es bisaro b'mayim es hatafa lebisaro. So let's listen to this. The pasuk says, "You shall literally immerse your flesh in the water, in the mikvah." Es, Rabbosai, is a ribui. The word es biblically always comes to include something. So the Torah is saying you have to go ahead and make sure to immerse your flesh and something else in the water. What's the and something else? Es hatafa lebisaro. That which is secondary to your flesh. What's secondary to my flesh? Umaynihu saro, hair. So both say you see that we learn from the pasuk itself that both one's flesh and one's hair must be without chatzitzas in order to immerse. So therefore I will say which part of immersion exactly, or which part of chatzitza is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It seems to all be learned out from the pasuk itself, which makes it a daraisa. To which the Gemara says, "Kiyasoy hilchasa l'chid Rabbi Yitzchak." You're right. Both say, where does the halacha l'Moshe Sinai of chatzitzas come along? It comes to Rabbi Yitzchak. Both say, listen to this, an incredible halacha. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says as follows: Amud Beis, Devar Torah. Both say, listen to this. Mid da'araisa rubo umakpid alav chotzeitz. But let's listen to this midoraisa. If you have a chatzitza that is rubo umakpid. Both say, what does this mean? Ruba means what? Ruba means what? Covers the majority of your body. Makpid, you're makpid on it. You are makpid, you are careful, you are insistent to remove it. Ultimately, again, chotzetz. That's a chatzitza. Both say the biblical definition of a chatzitza is any interposition which satisfies two criteria. Ruba covers the majority of the body. Makpid, you don't want it there. V'she'eno makpid alav, eno chotzetz. But Rabbi say, even if for argument's sake you have something that covers the majority of your body, but you're not makbid on it, doesn't matter to you. Doesn't matter to you. You would not normally be makbid to remove it. It's not a chatzitza. So I'll say this is pretty dramatic. Midoraisa on a biblical level, the only thing that is a chatzitza is rubo umakbid. The Gazru Chazal came along and said what? The Gazru al rubo she'eno makbid mishum rubo hamakbid. Chazal came along and they said, okay, we're also going to include on rubo ve'eno makbid. If something covers the majority of your body, even if you're not makbid on it, even if you don't care about it, you wouldn't be insistent on the removal of it, that's still a chatzitza. Why? Lest you come to confuse the case of rubo ve'eno makbid with the case of mishum rubo hamakbid. Because we'll say we're concerned that if we allow you to go to the mikvah with something that covers the majority of your body, because you're not makbid on it, you may come to inadvertently immerse with something that covers the majority of your body, and what? You are makbid on it. Furthermore again, vi'al mi'uto hamakbid mishum rubo hamakbid. Furthermore, Chazal also said that if halacha l'maisa, you have a chatzitza that is only on a miut, that is only on a small part of the body, but you are makbid, right? You are insistent on the removal of that. You are not allowed to be tovel on that, lest you come to confuse it with a case of mishum rubo hamakbid. So we'll say essentially what Chazal said was like this: Doraisa, the only type of chatzita that is problematic is rubo umakbid. We'll say this is the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. When we say dvar Torah, this is not a pasuk. This is the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai says the only problematic chatzitza is rubo umakbid. Rubo umakbid. Okay? Chazal essentially came along and said, to simplify it, Chazal said, if you have any part of that, either if you're rov, even if you're not makbid, or you're makbid, even if it's a miut, that's also chatzitza. So essentially, anything which resembles the da'oraisa in one way, either it's rov or it's makbid, is going to be problematic as well. But why not also go ahead and therefore be gozer on miut she'ena makbid, something that only covers a small part of the body, and you're not makbid, lest we be concerned mishum miut hamakbid, imish inam mishum rubo she'ena makbid. To which the Gemara says, no. He gufa gzera va'ano nekov v'negzera gzera legzera. To which the Gemara says, listen to the flow. Remember, Doraisa lach l'Moshe Misinai. What's the only type of problematic chatzitza? Ruba umakbid. Two criteria: covers the majority of the body, and you're makbid on it. Chazal stepped in and said, if you have one of those two, it's problematic. So if it's rubo, even if you're not makbid, or if you're makbid, even if it's miut, it's still going to be a problematic chatzitza. Asks the Gemara, so why not also be gozer on miut ve'eno makbid? Something is small and you're not makbid, only part of the body, and you're not makbid, lest you come to confuse with one of the other cases. To which the Gemara says, no. We'll say that's called gazrin and gzera legzera. You're laying on multiple levels of rabbinic enactments. We already were gozer miut umakbid, and ultimately again rubo ve'eno makbid as an additional layer of rabbinic gezerah. To start now being gozer on miut ve'eno makbid, that's a gezerah legzera. So I both say, so ultimately again, what comes out of here is that the halacha l'Moshe Misinai. So let's go back. The interesting thing about chatzitzos is that some of it is da'oraisa and some of it is halacha l'Moshe Misinai. So the notion that there can't be anything on my flesh, da'oraisa. The notion that there can't be any chatzitza in my hair, da'oraisa. So what does the halacha l'Moshe Misinai really give me? Interestingly enough, it gives me the definition. That what is the definition of a chatzitza? The definition of a chatzitza is, definition, rubo umakbid. That's the biblical definition. The Rabbanan came along and just added on to an additional layer and said, if it's miut umakpid, or again, rubo ve'eno makpid, either if you have makpid or you have rov, one of those two, ultimately, again, that is a chatzitza as well. Incredible. What about mechitzas? Also, remember again, this whole discussion was looking for this last part. Also, remember again, let's just review how we got here, right? How did we get here, Bosai? We got here because the entire Daf Hey only worked according to Rabbi Meir. Why? Because Rabbi Meir holds, what's the size of an amma? 6 tfachim. And therefore, again, the height of the aron was 10 tfachim, which gives me the minimum shear for the wall of a sukkah, for a mechitza. I, Rabbi Yehuda, you hold that the amma for kalim is only 5 tfachim. In which case, where do you get your shear that the wall of a sukkah is 10 tfachim, minimum shear for a wall of sukkah? To which Rabbi Yehuda responded, halacha l'Moshe misinai. Notice I said this whole discussion was for this last part. Mechitzin. What are for mechitzin? Hada amran. So the Gemara says, mechitzin is what we said before, namely that the halacha l'Moshe misinai is that the minimum shear for a wall ultimately, again, is going to be 10 tfachim. Rashi says, Legova Asara. Sanicha Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say this is very beautiful for Rabbi Yehuda. El Rabbi Meir, Michael Meir. We'll say, see, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need a halacha l'Moshe misinai to teach me that the minimum height of a wall is 10 tfachim. Why doesn't he need the halacha l'Moshe misinai? Where does he get it from? The aron, right? The aron. I already know the box of the aron is 9 tfachim. The lid of the aron is 1 tala. That was the whole Gemara yesterday. So what is Rabbi Meir going to do with the halacha l'Moshe misinai by mechitzin? Listen to this. Ki asai hilchasa legud v'lavud v'dofen akuma. Incredible, Rabbi Osai. So ultimately, again, for Rabbi Meir, the halacha. So this is very interesting. Everyone agrees that there is a halacha l'Moshe misinai by mechitza. The shaila is what you use it for. Rabbi Yehuda understands, and again, I will say this was different masoras. Rabbi Yehuda understood that the halacha l'Moshe misinai for mechitza was there to teach me that the minimum height of a wall is 10 tefachim. That's where he learns it out from. Rabbi Meir says, that's learned out from the aron. So the halacha l'Moshe misinai by mechitza teaches me what? The halacha also will say like good, right? Good, lavud, dofen akor. Remember again, good refers to all of those cases where you take existing walls, you extend them upward, or again, you take the edge of rooftops, right, and you go in and extend them downward. So good asik, good achis, pitikra yard v'sosem. These are all the same halachos. Or lavud. Both say lavud, of course, is the halacha that says what? Any two things that are less than 3 tefachim away from each other are considered to be joint. And dofen akuma, which we just learned in Sunday's daf. We learned dofen akuma that halacha lamaisa, as long as there is less than 4 amos between the schach and the wall, even if that middle area is schach psula, we view the wall as being bent, and we machshir the sukkah. Beautiful, both say. So I just want to point out, this is what we just learned over here, is one of these incredibly beautiful, like shas sugyas. You'll find this a number of times. We've seen this already a number of times throughout Shas. I will say it's such an incredible Gemara because in one little Gemara, based on one pasuk from the Shivas Haminim, we go ahead and really extrapolate so many incredibly important and profound halachas. Beautiful. I will say the good news over here is we now close out the sugya of the minimum height of the sukkah. Remember again, everyone is agreeing on the conclusion. What's the conclusion? Minimum height of a sukkah? 10 tefachim. Remember again, that 10 tefachim does not include what? The schach, right? That's 10 tefachim of airspace, we'll call it, interior space. The schach has to be on top of that. The only machlokes is how we are learning that out. Rabbi Meir, learning it out from the dimensions of the aron. Rabbi Yehuda, learning it out from a halacha l'Moshe misinai. Incredible. Says the Gemara, we'll say next. V'she'ena shalosh tefanos. Remember the Mishnah went on, and the Mishnah said, halacha l'maisa, if it doesn't have 3 walls, right? It has to have a minimum of 3 walls in the sukkah. So the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanon, Stein kilchason, ushlishes afilu tefach. Also the Brisa says, when we speak about 3 walls, it's really 2 complete walls, 2, we'll call 2 whole walls, but the 3rd wall could even just be a tefach. So the Gemara says, Reb Shimon Omer, shalosh kilchason, or revius afilu tefach. Reb Shimon says, ultimately, again, no, you need 3 full walls, and the 4th wall could be even a tefach. So we'll say fundamental machlokes about the minimum shear of sukkah. The Tanakama saying, it's a total of 3 walls, 2 whole. The 3rd one only has to be a tefach. Rabbi Shimon saying, no, 4 walls. 4 walls, 3 whole walls. The 4th one only needs to be a tapach. So we'll say, b'mai kamiflagi. What's the machlokis over here? So we'll say, this is actually quite fascinating as well. Rabbanan Savri, yesh ein lamasores, Rabbi Shimon Savri, yesh ein lamikra. We'll say the machlokis is going to be how you should darshan a pasuk. Should you darshan a pasuk the way it is written, or should you darshan a pasuk the way it is read? So as we're going to see, the Rabbanan hold, we darshan a pasuk, ultimately again, yesh im lamasores, Rashi says, kimasha kasav. We look at how the pasuk is written, not how it is pronounced. And Rabbi Shimon says, we look at how the pasuk is pronounced, how it's read. What does this mean? Let's analyze. Rabbanan savri yesh im lamasores. The Rabbanan say we look ultimately again how the pasuk is written. So how is the pasuk, I will say, by Sukkah written? Listen to this. Basukos, basukos, basukos. So I will say that's interesting. Now, if you notice again, what's the difference? The first 2 times we find the word sukos written, it's written chaser without a vav. The 3rd time, it's written with a vav. So the Rabbanan essentially say like this. The Rabbanan say, when sukos is written, because remember again, the Rabbanan say we look how something is written, what we call yesh eim lamasora. So I will say, I should just give you a word of introduction here. This machlokes is a fundamental machlokes in how you darshan psukim. Yesh im lamasoras, yesh im lamikra. When we darshan a pasuk, do we look at how the words are written, or do we look at how the words are read? So that's a fundamental machlokes in how you darshan. The Rabbanan will say we look at how the psukim are written. So we have basukos twice chaser, basuk without the vav, basukos once with the vav. So we'll say in the Rabbanan's Darshanas model, essentially what you have is as follows. Every basukos without a vav counts as 1. A basukos with a vav counts as 2. So basukos, basukos without a vav, basukos without a vav, basukos with a vav. Gives you a total of how many sukos? Harikan, arba. 4. So we have to work with essentially 4 mentionings of sukkah. Harikan arba. Dal chad legufei. That was you have to take away. You have to go ahead and remove one of those from this, because also remember again, one of those sukkos teaches us what? The mitzvah of sukkah, right? Look at Rashi just a moment. So the gufei, almost right across in Rashi. De'in darshan tchilos pasuk hanem arishon in l'drasha ala mashmal asa. We'll say, so the first sukkos can't be used for a drasha, because the first sukkos come to teach in the mitzvah of sukkah. So pashu le tlasa. That leaves me with how many sukkos, Rabbi say? How many sukkos? 3. Shtaim kilchasan. Rabbi say that teaches me what? Shtaim kilchasan v'asoi hilchasa v'gar asa l'shlishas v'okmatavech. Rabbi say. So the Rabbanan will posit that there is a halacha l'Moshe misinai by sukkah, and the halacha l'Moshe misinai by sukkah teaches me that the last wall need not be a complete wall. Rather, it just needs to be a tafach. So according to the Rabbanan, how many walls do you have? Well, I have 4 sukkos altogether. Remember again, basukos chaser, basukos male. First sukkos without a vav, second sukkos without a vav, third sukkos with a vav, yields me a total of 4 sukkos. Take out the first one, because it teaches me the din of sukkah. I'm left with a sukkah of 3 walls. 3 walls. Then Allah tells you, by the way, the third wall need not be a complete wall. All it needs to be is a tapach. That creates their shita, the shir of sukkah, 3 walls, 2 complete ones. The third one only has to be a tapach. Rabbi Shimon Savar, Rabbi Shimon on the other hand holds, yesh ein lamikra. Rabbi Shimon says, no, we don't look at how the pasuk is written, we look at how it's read. How is it read, Rabbi Osai? It's read as if what? As if every word is male. It's read sukos, sukos, sukos. In other words, when you read it, there's no distinction. When you read it as if it was male. Oh, if each of them are male, Rabbi Osai, how many sukos do you have to work with? How many do you have to work with? 6. Right? 3 words, but each one represents 2, because each one is male. Hare kan sheish. Ooh, I have 6 sukkos. It's a lot of sukkah to work with. Dal chad legufei. You have to peel off 1 sukkos, right, to teach you the din of sukkah. Now remember again, 1 is equal to 2, right? So I have to remove 1 sukkos to teach you the din of sukkah. So pashulu arba. That leaves me with 4 sukkos. So we'll say 4 sukkos teaches me that what? A sukkah requires 4 walls. Then comes the halacha l'Moshe in Sinai, shalosh kilchasan, asay hilchasa, v'gar asay l'revius v'okmei atefach. So ultimately, you're going to say, so again, that'll leave me with 4 walls. Everyone agrees, Rabbi say, on the halacha l'Moshe in Sinai, which is very interesting. Everyone agrees that the halacha l'Moshe in Sinai teaches me that what? We'll call it the last wall need not be a complete wall. The last wall only has to be a tefach wall. The shaila just is, what's the last wall? So in the Rabbanan's model, they hold yesh im lemikra. We darshan based on how the word is read. Basukos, basukos, basukos. It's read malay. That's 6 sukos. Take off 1, ultimately to teach the din of sukkah. Ultimately, now I'm left with 4. Sukkah requires 4 walls. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai tells you the 4th wall only has to be a tefach. Incredible. Incredible. So the Gemara says, that's the machlokes. The machlokes, the Rabbanon and Rabbi Shimon is yesh im lemikra, yesh im lemasoretz. How do you darshan? The Rabbanon will say yesh im lemasoretz. You darshan based on how it's written. Therefore, I end up with 4 sukkos. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai goes ahead. I'm sorry. Take off 1 of them to teach me the din of sukkah. I'm left ultimately again with 3 sukkos. Sukkah requires 3 walls. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai tells you the 3rd wall only has to be a tefach. Rabbi Shimon holds yesh im lemikra. We look at how it's read, not how it's written. Basukos, basukos, basukos. 6 sukkos altogether. Take away 1. Ultimately teaching the din of sukkah. That leaves me with 4. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai teaches me the 4th wall only has to be a tefach. Incredible. The other possibility is the kuli alma yesh im lemikra. Maybe everyone holds that we darshan psukim based on how it's read and not on how it's written. And here's what they argue about. Mar savar sichacha bayakra, umar savar sichacha lo bayakra. Ultimately, again, one opinion will hold that you have to use up one of the sukkos to teach me the din of schach, right? And therefore, again, that'll be the Rabbanon. Therefore, you're only going to be left with 3 sukkos for the walls. 3 sukkos for the walls. But Rabbi Shimon, on the other hand, holds that no, you don't need to use one of the sukkos for schach. Why not? Because Rabbi say it's obvious that schach is included with sukkah. Why is it obvious that schach is included with sukkah? Because the entire essence of what makes a sukkah is the schach. And therefore, again, you don't have to use up one of those for the drush. Sorry, we'll stop over. We'll pick up in Mirat Hashem. Really a fascinating machlokes. We'll pick up in Mirat Hashem with the rest of it in Mirat Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach.